Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Center for the Less Good Idea. My name is Athena Mazarakis, and I'm the MOMENTEUR of SO, the Academy for the Less Good Idea. Welcome to this evening's presentation of How Showing the Making, featuring the work of the extraordinary Penny Siopis. This evening's presentation is going to take a slightly different format. I see that everyone knows exactly where our seating usually is and has gravitated to those places. But this evening is an invitation to enter into the working space of Penny. So for those of you that haven't been to a How Showing the Making, it is what its title suggests. It's an opportunity to come a little closer to understanding the strategies and the processes employed by artists in the creation of their work. So this evening, we are graced with having Penny take us through that in an intimate way. And our invitation to you is to really gather around to see the work happen. So as you all know, Penny is an internationally celebrated, renowned artist, a painter, installation artist, photographer, and filmmaker who has exhibited both in solo shows and group shows the world over. She currently has a retrospective at the National Museum of Contemporary Art in Athens, and we're feeling so very privileged and blessed to have her here with us at the center. And we've had her here for the last 2 days in an extraordinary time as she's been preparing for this evening's sharing. So I know that you're in for a really intimate and deep investigation and insight into Penny's work, into her thinking, into her philosophies, into her deep relationality and collaboration with material. And that is something that really appeals to us at the center in the way that we're so invested in collaboration and collective making, not baiting. Making. That was a terrible Freudian slip. But there's been something so profoundly wonderful about watching this deep relationship with material and how that reveals Penny's understanding of our relationality to that which is outside of ourselves, to each other, to the natural world, to everything beyond the borders of our own skin. And so we are tracing tonight, to give you a little bit of a frame, these strategies of making and the thinking that informs Penny's work, drawing a thread from her painting into her filmmaking. And we do that also intentionally because we're doubly delighted that Penny is part of our Sounding Pictures program, which takes place at the end of October, beginning of November. Our second collations, curated and envisaged by Neo Muyanga, the impresario for the Center for the Less Good Idea. And Penny is one of the featured artists on that program, presenting one of her films. So we're leveraging on the momentum of that and are delighted to really be able to get up close to her. So a bit of housekeeping. I promise I'll keep quiet very shortly. We're trying to get you as close to the work as possible. So once I stop talking, I'm going to invite you. In fact, let's do that now. Could we all get up and gather around the plastic sheeting here? If you're feeling poorly or tired or exhausted, you know yourselves. If you need to sit, if you absolutely need to sit, that's what the chairs are there for. But we're going to encourage you as much as possible to be in this immersive space with Penny. The ushers will also be around to gently guide you. If we know that there might be a moment where you might get paint splattered on you, we might ask you to move away. So that for this opening moment, you're at a good place. And if you do get paint splattered on you, you could always keep that outfit and you will have an original Penny Siopis. But yeah, we invite you to come close to things, observe, feel free to move in the space. And there will be a moment at the end where you are able to sit and look at the films, or some of the films. So just a bit of housekeeping. If and when you do walk across the plastic, please to exercise caution and take care. Don't slip. I also want to point out there's a big white stripe over there with something over a plastic bag. That's a microphone. I'm pointing it out. Please don't trip over that. So just be aware of each other and be aware of the space. So with that, I ask you to give a warm round of applause to invite Penny into the space.
This is not a cooking class. Sorry. Looks like. Okay. Okay. Splash. Ink. Liquid. Transparent. Pristine. Supposed to be symmetrical, which means your floor is not flat. Huh? Okay. So, sort of should look like a Rorschach's test and have that kind of symmetry, but also doesn't matter because it's also going to be made asymmetrical through the glue. So the glue, like a big globule, it's white, it's viscous, and it's messy. It's kind of visceral. So there's another element which often gets forgotten. The poor canvas. The canvas is a part of this deal. You know, we often look at what we think is the main event here, and we forget that the main event is only a main event because it has relationship with its ground. So the figure and the ground are one. We don't have the figure without the ground. We don't have the ground without the figure. And this is the first point of relationality any artist engages with when they have a piece of paper or a canvas or whatever the field is that bounds the event, that there's always this relationality. And that sometimes is a very simple way, just the mere act of making an image, which if you extrapolate, becomes one of the most complex philosophies ever, but actually one we can't do without, which is this relationality. And the canvas is the ground, but it's also the field in which various things get enacted, not only what's happening with the material, but me too, I'm material, and I will be walking around. So basically, as I'm standing here now, this doesn't mean that this is the right way around. It can be any way around. And orientation of the canvas is also something that creates the meaning of the work. So all of these factors come into play. And I'm now going to just proceed like I would, like as if you're not here, but I'll talk to myself like I often do. And I'll just carry on responding and working in the way I work, but also hopefully showing you through the way I work, through my body, what some of the kind of main concerns are around the embodiment of the work and the embodiment which also includes me. So basically I set the conditions for something to happen. That's my task here. But I'm a collaborator in this process. So I start using what is the given, which is the glue and the ink, and continue working in a way which really I can't determine any outcome. Because why? Because the white glue has now obscured my vision. So I add other colors, and there's nothing systematic around this. It really is contingent. Just watch you don't get a splash, huh? Now these little inks are all transparent, which means they receive whatever they fall onto. So they receive the white of the canvas. Now then I get frustrated and I just want enough of the drips already. So you can see what's happening, and something's happening. Quite a lot is happening. And one of these conditions about all of these things happening is that of horizontality. And horizontality is the domain of, what would we say, the domain where we're sort of lying down, we're not an erect human, usually. And that's certainly the take I like on it. It's the space of the dream. It's the space when your whole body is closer to the ground. I mean, I'm standing on my feet here, but I could be lying down, I should be lying down and making this painting. And maybe next time, actually, you can have me lying down and you can twirl me around. But that is a really important aspect. That is also a concept. Horizontality is a concept. And that's not only because it's versus verticality, but because there's a whole lot of ideas attached to horizontality. You could say the space of the dream is the space of the unconscious. You can say the space of the dream is the space of the vulnerability. You can say the space of the dream is the space where anything can happen. Literally, it's a space of imagination. Anything can happen in your dream, absolutely anything. And it's also the space which allows material to act, because it's not forcing the material to be conditioned by the verticality that we usually think of images taking, at least certainly paintings. So here, the horizontality works in terms of the way the medium will flow and pool and make its own shapes and create its own edges. It's already bound by the edge of the canvas. So the edge of the canvas is the edge that creates the world in which this thing happens. But of course, sometimes it escapes, huh? We've seen some of it there, and we'll see more how materiality likes to escape signification. It likes to escape that. But that's not to say materiality doesn't have its own language, but there's an important aspect to thinking about the relationship of materiality to representation. And working horizontally allows all these things to come together, at least in my brain, in a way that is full of surprises. And you can see here already what's happening. This inky pool is meeting the viscous pool, and there's some kind of relationship happening there. That looks beautiful for the moment, but there's no way it's going to stay like that. This is all about change. And that's what's kind of wonderful and also scary about the painting. It's not scary for me because I've been doing it for a long time, and I love risk, so it's fine. But the pooling is curious in this canvas because the canvas has a stretcher, like you can see at the back there, for those who don't know about painting. That crossbar holds the frame apart and secures the canvas. In my very, very big canvases, I sometimes take those stretchers at the back out. So the canvas dips then, as it does now, and that is one of the conditions as well that I make. I'm sort of moving around talking now, so you'll have to follow my aberrant thoughts. But the condition is that the canvas is stretched. This is the way I work. And you'll be aware of people who have worked horizontally, sort of paradigmatic images is Jackson Pollock, who works on an unstretched piece of canvas, and he can walk on it. You know, he can literally walk and do his drips, and the canvas lies there, not resistant. This one resists, and it also becomes part of the way of making an image. Because it resists, I can press it down, it has give. It's like a drum, and it comes back again. It also, though, makes it very clear to me that this, and we'll go on to the next stage now, it's horizontality, and working like this has limitations, of course, and one of the limitations, one of the difficulties is, now, where do I do it, from which side, is how to get to the middle. Because I'm only so big and I'm only so high, which means if I lean, I have to put my hand on something. I'm not Jackson Pollock that can just stand on this thing. I have to actually respect that it has its own life, this canvas. It has give, because it's actually not flat on the ground. And that give is part of the way that the movement of the liquid and the viscous glue is determined. And the stretcher, you can see, is here. So that's why this is not going into the middle completely, because there's something that's resisting, and that's the stretcher. So if I was a formalist, I'd say all these things are important about form only. But form for me has a very specific meaning as it relates to formlessness. What we're getting here is a sort of a set of, I don't know, a set of incidents that look like formless, but they could look like something, but they're not necessarily anything, because they're not bounded in a pictorial way at all. So I have to try and get into the middle, which I can do here. If I want to get higher, I either have to go around, or I have to try and balance on the stretcher, which means I'm not going to get sticky, so I'll go this side. Here's the stretcher, where is it? Here. So I can do this, but it's like doing a sort of dance. Now I can put the glue down. Now get back. And the glue is now semi-covering. Actually, it's covering it, except that some of the ink is coming through. And the glue is white, so I can't really see what's happening. I can only know that something is happening there.
Penny, could we share when you're working? I'm over here.
Where are you?
To your left.
Yeah?
So what you've just shown us, what happens when you're working on a much bigger scale and trying to get into the center as you did there? Could we share a bit of that?
Have you got a...
I think we do.
Yeah, good. It just happens we have a picture. Okay, so sometimes, like any context, you have to get an aid, something to aid you to do something. Your body is only so big, so wide. And here, I was working in the Maitland Institute in Cape Town, and there was a big chain. This had been a meat factory or something before. There was this hectic chain that was on a rod. So I just got the chain and sort of swung on the chain and put a tub of glue and was able to get to the middle of the canvas. So that was in that situation. Here, we don't have a chain. So, anyway, so it's roundabout, the canvas. Movement, my body movement is part of it, but the movement of what's happening is also part of it. So, more colors. It feels a little bit forlorn at the top. It feels, if this is the top, maybe it's not even the top. We don't know. Okay, so I think what's kind of important to say without getting into too much of the detail now is that we think in a lot of philosophy these days about the world as being vibrant matter. Even if we can't see movement or change, we understand it as movement and change, and that we absolutely integrated as humans to this matter. We are matter. And I'm quite fascinated that, there's a lot of interest in that at the moment with art, and people use soil, they use all sorts of materials, especially materials that we associate with nature. But I'm also really interested in glue, because glue it's a very everyday medium. It's actually something you just mend things, furniture. And so it has this quality that's not really romantic. It's not earth, it's not anything else. It's common garden glue. It's very unromantic, but it acts. It has this incredible capacity to act. And that's what makes me feel that it's been such an incredibly powerful medium for me over the years, actually, for a long time. And I've built up this idea about material acts, and the primary agent in this is actually the glue. Mainly because of its quality to transform. When it goes out of this capsule, it goes out into the world, it gets air, and it starts interacting with the ink. So there's this kind of chemical change that happens. But I can't see this chemical change, not altogether, because, I can see some effects of it, but it's basically disguised by its whiteness. Okay.
Penny, could you tell us how you discovered working with glue as a material in this way?
Yeah, so in the 80s I made these history paintings. They call them history paintings, and they're collage, bits of history book, South African school history textbooks, images, also some photocopies. I'd cut them up, and I needed to produce this huge landscape of these tiny little fragments of colonial history in the making, these kind of stereotypes of colonizers and colonized, and probably the most well-known is Patient on a Monument. But do you have an image here of the... It's coming. Okay. So this is like one of the paintings I was making. And here I started using the glue as just an adhesive. It seemed to be good. It was environmentally friendly. It had no acid in it. And as I was applying the glue, I thought, gosh, this is white. Now it's going to cover the image with the collage. And then I realized as I went along that the glue became transparent. And then it produced a film on the paper, because maybe it's slightly different now, but you couldn't put, I was wanting to paint on the image as well, to some degree. So in those days, oil paint was kind of acidic, and it could eat into paper. So I was hoping that there would be some film on the surface, and this is cold glue. Very simple little character that came and said, yeah, just use me. And this worked out to be part of the way I use the medium until about the early 2000s. I was traveling abroad and I needed to make some work on small pieces of paper. Started working with watercolor, which was fine, but it felt not embodied. It didn't have a body to it. So I was able to use glue. Now this is traveling a lot all over Europe, so I needed to be able to let it dry and see it. And then it gave me this kind of embodied surface to work on paper. But most of these works were small. And it was only really in 2008, when I was working on large canvases, that I started, but I was still working with a reference, so the medium wasn't yet completely autonomous. There was a piece of work that I called Ambush, which is basically, the reference was Hokusai's Dream of Fisherman's Wife. Here you can see it. And I was working in my studio in Melville, late night, and the reference, there was an octopus, and I thought, great, section of the octopus would be perfect in this thick glue, and bound made the glue within the shape of the octopus head and assumed that it would stay in its lines. Went to bed, woke up in the morning, came down, and it had escaped its boundary. And that was perfect. So from ambush, I was ambushed into taking on glue as an autonomous medium. And slowly, as I did this, I also started relinquishing, not entirely, but a reference, pictorial reference. So I started relying on how the glue and ink reacted and how they produced a kind of gestalt, a form or set of forms, and that some set of images seemed to emerge from them. And I'll speak about that later. But this was the kind of epitome of a work that has no pictorial reference. It's entirely produced from the dynamics of the medium. In the end, you choose which orientation the work goes, and that produces a set of visual values that, at least for the viewer, might be suggestive enough to think, this is explosive, this is a fire, this is a vagina, this is a something, and that looks like a little figure going up. And so there are all these elements that come into it that make the participatory quality of the glue and ink and me in the making move to the canvas in the seeing or in the perception of that other people can bring to bear on the work. So I want to just add a bit more of a splash here to do something which is less laborious than all those little bits. So now you can see how it starts gravitating to the middle. Sorry, did you get a splash? Not yet. You want one? All right, so I'll do the last bit of glue here. Now we don't know what side up this painting is going to be, and if that's even important, because as most painters will know, if they're not completely wedded to the orientation of a painting. Are quite happy, many painters are quite happy turning things around and around and around and not worrying about how they began, because they're open to chance. Okay, so can you see the movement? I don't know if you can see it, this sort of coming down. Okay, so this is not really a conventional way of painting, not because people haven't painted horizontally or because people don't work horizontally first to get the pooling effect. Because it's very difficult to get a pooling effect if you're working on the wall, because everything will drip down. So you don't want the whole painting sort of on the floor. So, and you don't want the drips either. And it's also interesting because obviously Jackson Pollock's drip paintings are so manifestly on the floor. You can see how they've pooled. He didn't like paint on the wall and they drip down. So the dynamic of the shape of a drip, it sounds very ridiculous, is actually a way that you would forensically be able to see how the painting has been made. So this is not conventional for other reasons, that when you make a painting, like we'll look at in a moment on that, usually you're working vertically. So the painting, traditionally at least, is on an easel or on the wall. It's even more traditionally a window into the world, like it's an illusionistic image that means that the painter has been able to translate a three-dimensional object onto a two-dimensional surface, or has been able to use a reference in a particular way. These paintings don't have a reference, so that's also fine, because many so-called abstract paintings don't have a reference, but an external reference, I mean. But it's also probably the most fundamental thing about a painting when you're making it, is that you have to see the mark you've made to be able to make the next mark. Now, if I can't see, what is it doing? What's it saying to me? Effectively, I'm painting blind. And I like that idea. I sort of developed this idea of painting blind because it means your other senses have to come into play. You have to trust, you have to intuit and think, okay, what happens if... When you go around, you see it's escaping. Materiality is escaping its function as a support for an image. Oh, sorry, did I step on the mic?
No.
Okay. So you see, it's not so easy to be a painter in this way. You have to go to gym, or shall I say, I don't go to gym. This is my gym. What's also difficult is when you feel like the stretcher and the frame might break because you're trying to get into the corner and you're trying to go really up. So I don't know if you can see this, but there's all sorts of things happening here between what would be figure and ground, figure and ground, figure and ground. Why are we thinking the glue is the figure? I don't know. It could be figure, ground, figure, ground. So it's one of these fundamental questions in any image making, is when we decide what is a figure and what is a ground, and why, in fact, we think that the figure is more important. My students were never allowed to talk about background. You know, they'd come into first year painting class, you probably remember this, and they start painting. I don't know what to do with the background. There is no such thing as a background. It's a painting. Everything is there. Figure, ground, this lovely dance of figure, ground, figure, ground. And figure doesn't mean a person, anything, a form, an apple, anything. It's a mark. It's literally a mark which indicates that there's some relationship to the edge of its field that it's made on. Sorry, now I must stop getting too technical.
So on that, Penny, you asked me to let you know when we're nearing the end of this time frame, so you can start moving to the next phase.
Okay. I was going to do one more thing that is important to... So one of the things about working in this way is you can't really make it do what you think it might want to do, you know, even its gestalt. But there are lots of ways that now I've realized what happens with the glue and ink when it has these little kind of speckles that can't be made from a big splash, that can't be made from a big pour, you know, pour meaning not a hand pour. It has to be made in this way. Now, working horizontally, that means I'm also really, really very close to the surface. It's as if my eyes are on the fingertips and as if I'm in this dream space where I see no edges. Very unlike the critical principles of painting, which is you see what you're doing and you have the capacity to stand back, to get distance. Here there's nothing. I'm looking down and I'm immersed. Okay, so let me move to the next phase. Sorry. Okay. So now...
So as Penny moves there, you might want to get a little bit closer here. So feel free to be on the plastic, it's fine. And if we could just, yes, open up space over there.
Okay. So now when I came on Wednesday, we needed a work or a thing or a painting, whatever we call them, that has already dried sufficiently for you to see what happens when the white becomes transparent, because this glue will now become transparent. And then we'll see the shapes of the residues, basically, I call them. And let's look at it now. We'll turn it around and then... So this is what I did on Wednesday, and it had to dry. And we were still looking at it. There's still parts that are wet. And let's put it up. Okay. Not your side.
Yeah. You need to turn it the other way.
I think it's the other way. It actually doesn't matter which way.
I think you were right the first time.
Yeah.
It's definitely the other way.
This way. This is part of the choreography of making paintings like this. If they were just normal paintings, they'd sit on the easel and wouldn't cause trouble. Okay, so you can see there's no more white in the canvas that is obscuring. The white that is here is dry. It's dry. There's nothing sticky there. Can you see what? Can you see?
I love this collaborative hanging. Thank you all very much.
Okay. You see the part that's a little bit gooey? And this one's already, it's threatening to come apart a little bit. Now, I think that's fantastic. And that wasn't made dark like that. That is the accumulation of colors going into that space. There was no maroon, dark red in it. And that's another aspect of painting like this that is not like usually what we do when we paint a conventional painting. Paint a conventional painting, we have a palette and we mix our colors here and we paint. Even if we don't mix our colors here, we apply the paint. We are not working with emerging forms and colors that the painting, while it's been horizontal, has been doing, and really the painting's painting itself. It's getting its own colors, weird colors, colors that you've never seen before. And it's normally, and the speckles, by the way, are these little, for me that's very key, the little speckles at the top from the dripping of the paint. from my hand, because there's just a certain kind of pressure that comes from your finger that doesn't come from any other form of a drip. And the other thing that's really key is that almost everything in the glue and ink process has a kind of blur to it, because the glue is giving that blur. So the edges are very seldom very sharp, except where there's a build-up. That's obviously where the stretcher gave a dip, where the canvas dipped. So there's a build-up, so you get a very nice, beautiful line that I would never be able to do by hand. And also I probably wouldn't think of doing in that way. So there's something kind of sea-like, underwater-like about them, which, when we talk about my films, corresponds, I think, quite a lot to the kind of blur of the old 8mm film. So maybe we can just let it stand. I think it's fine. So
Set orientation.
yeah, exactly, absolutely. So when I start looking at it again, and I think, now there's another part. This is maybe the painting part where I stand back in a critical distance and think, what does it look like? What am I seeing? But also what I'm seeing, of course, is already part of what's been built into the reservoir of images that are there in our unconscious. So when I say there's no reference, I mean there's no pictorial reference, but we have references in our body, in our DNA. That's where it all is. So there's certain things that I see, not only because of the way I've been affected by images as I've grown up, but also in my language of art, on painting, the conventions of painting. And these things are fascinating. We've sort of grown up with, whether we see it through other forms of mediation or not, through very fundamental body gestures that we see made into pictures. And there are only so many forms that there are in the language of form. So I have not been doing this very recently, but I've been doing it in the smaller works, what I'll show you. But I'm moving to the larger scale works again, but using oil paint now, in response to the given that has come as the residue of the process. I find this is part of my interest is also that very language of painting is not antagonistic to the spontaneity and the sort of acceptance of form being made in other ways. So I'm trying to work with the painting itself now, living in the world, and calling me to respond to it in whatever way I feel I want to respond to it. And this is very much the feel of the atlas paintings, which we'll look at now, the smaller ones on paper. And the method is literally like improvisation, jazz, call and response. What does it want? And they're demanding little paintings, those, and I'll speak about them in a minute. For their size, they're very demanding. And in terms of calling me to do something. And now I'm scared to, because it's easier to show on this large scale, the different kinds of possibilities that you have with an oil paint. Now it's applied, it's not emerging, it's being applied, but it's applied in a way that's responsive to what's already there. This is a body already, this is a something, it's not nothing, it's not just stuff. So my sense is often when I respond is I'm a little bit precious. I think it's so beautiful, the painting made itself so beautifully, why would I want to do something to it? And then I start often in a way which is the potentially least interesting parts of the painting, for me at least, or the parts that I feel want to be accentuated. So now I'm using a glaze which doesn't eliminate, I should use this part, doesn't eliminate the image underneath. It's just putting a glaze on it. It's a bit like another kind of transparent ink. So this is a transparency which will, because I'm a bit cautious at this point, still keep these lovely little speckles and spots that have been, they've sort of just arrived there in the process. They're residues of the process. And that's a glaze. Okay, go on. And something else got caught in the process as well. In there. Now, I mean, I'm doing this quite fast. Then I also am fascinated by what happens with oil paint, because it's a weird, different kind of viscous material. And it's crusty, it can get crusty, it can get obnoxious in that it won't flow well. But it can have this incredible quality for impasto. So, you can see I'm not one for restraint. And I really, most artists will say this, they're special tools. This palette knife has to have this funny bend in it, and it's not because it was bought bent, it became bent in the process. And the bend now becomes very much part of how the paint gets applied. And here's another thing, looks like a cooking lesson, but it's actually not, although I did start painting very thick paintings like this where I actually did use cake icing utensils to apply the paint. So here, this in a funny kind of weird way, it's also echoing my own language, personal language of paint. So now I decide I want to put this impasto on. And I want a much more, another kind of feel.
Beautiful colour.
Yeah, and it's just like that. That's Alyssa Crimson, which is that it's this colour without an opaque white.
Yes.
So here's another kind of white doing different things. And one of the things I think Athena and I were talking about was the sound of making art. You know, there's banging and smashing and that, you know, all sorts of extraordinary sounds that are fascinating. Oh, sorry, I got that on me. So impasto picks up the light in an extraordinary way, because it actually sits a little bit away from the surface. The glue and ink picks up the light too, but almost as if it's underwater. So these are very difficult to photograph, by the way, because you can never get the proper sort of depth of field here. So the impasto is really thick, and I could allow it to stay very thick, or I could make it into a surface which can become a way of finding the form that I want to work with. It also means that I have to commit. So I commit to this. If it doesn't work, I either have to scrape it all off, and I don't know if it'll work or won't work, because this is quite a long time, you know, making these paintings. Or I let it dry, and then I use it as another level, another layer of skin, which I scratch into, which I can show you on the smaller works. But these are the different applications of paint. And of course, I haven't mentioned the most straightforward one, which is if you just have a color. Let me take one of my favorite colors, is Indian yellow. I must first put a glaze on Indian yellow, sorry. So I can also just, my gosh, the wrong way around. Okay, so here I'm just putting another color on to show you this beautiful glaze, what it will do to these colors. This is a transparent oil paint, so it's a bit like the transparent inks. It allows you to see what's underneath. So you get this idea that there are two things at once. There's two kinds of surfaces in play. So you get these amazing colors. Now I can mix some of this color into the mix here, and do what most normal painters do, which is actually paint, make marks, change the marks, bring in another color. Deeper color. do what I shouldn't do, which you're not supposed to do, is that. Make little dancing marks, gestural marks, stand back, look at it, get the critical distance that I'm supposed to have and think, it actually works quite well in tandem with this shape. So I want to make much more of it. And I use a medium. It's also sounding very technical, but people often ask this, and I think it's quite useful to speak about in the process. So this is like a painting gel that makes the paint more fluid, but also dries quickly. So I want to sort of mimic that or do something with that. So nothing yet looks very figurative, you know, obviously in an obvious way. But something is happening in terms of the relationship. It may well be that I start thinking about this as some kind of figure. And a sure way to make that obvious is to do something that's almost like cliched, but really a nice thing to do, except I don't have any black, but that's fine, is, okay, take some white, a little dot, and that would look like a little eye, so it would give you some indication of some detail or some presence. Also take away surfaces that would bring in another tone. And by taking away surfaces or taking away marks rather than applying a new positive, so-called positive form on there, you get another way of establishing some kind of figural shape. Okay, then maybe that's not so, maybe it is sort of an eye. And so it goes. I mean, just putting that face there, it's not really something. But it gives you the sense that anything is possible, absolutely anything is possible as you're painting. So this is what oil paint can do. Don't like it, scrape it off, you know? So now what I want to do is move to these little paintings. And maybe we can show the image first. They're called atlases. Actually, Sibyl, can you start putting them up for me? They're a single work with different chapters, if you like. I started painting them during lockdown, because obviously we all had to be in our own little spaces. I didn't have a big studio. I had my living room, which was this space, and I started working on these very small pieces of paper, very thick pieces of paper, and I'm going to show you now the different kind of relationship to the movement, my bodily movement, with working the beginnings of these glue and ink atlases. So I didn't use the spray bottle on the big image, the big canvas, but it's actually one of the important tools in breaking some of the lines or opening up the form. And what I actually feel very strongly is the method of painting, which is basically open form, which the atlas paintings really do engage with. So if I want to just show you how this works, I'll come back to this. Okay, just go. So the water bottle just sort of, it doesn't integrate, but it brings another form of liquid.
What is open form?
Open form is just meaning that it's a form that stays perpetually sort of open enough for you to be able, you as a viewer or the interpreter or me, see that there is a potential in those forms because they're open enough to be anything.
So it's like half-baked.
So it's like a visual ambiguity. Huh?
It's like half-baked.
Yeah, well, half-baked.
On purpose.
Yes, yeah. It's like if you have an open form, it's more improvisational. So for instance, if you took a note or something, you know, so it could go, it's just if you imagined it in music or something, because there's a lot more open form perhaps in music or in poetry, where you put things together in a seemingly random way, but the form, the way these random elements come together is itself a space, it's not nothing, and that allows things to be changeable and move very easily. So I just call the work open form, because, you know, otherwise people say, well, what's your intention with it? Well, it's open form. My manifest intention is to keep the form open. It doesn't really tell you about the subject matter. I think subject matter is another story which does interest me.
So on that, what do you do if the form decides not to stay open and if it becomes chaotic?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. Becomes ugly.
Grotesque, yeah. Do you step back or do you power through that?
Well, I only know that when it's dry. And that's the problem. So I have to wait. And that's another thing that I thought was really interesting about doing this tonight, is that when I started working in this way, especially on the big scale, with glue as the autonomous medium, I became quite anxious in talking about the process, because it felt like the process was just a process to get to an image, but it isn't. The process is the idea itself. And how do you talk about process if you don't witness it? And even I don't witness the whole, I mean, this is a time lapse. I'd have to be standing here for 5 days just staring at it to see it change. So I cannot really witness its minutiae of change. I can only see it afterwards when it's dry. And then the air has done that, not me. I didn't make it change. The air came in and dries quicker, slower, whatever. So the air is also one of the forces in the process. Yeah, and so then but you're right, it can be a huge big canvas, and you look at it and you think, there's something so horrible about this edge. Often it's edges that get me. They feel that they're unsympathetic. So I think open form is in fact where edges and shapes have a simpatico with what they're next door to, rather than just being imposed. They could be masterful in every way, but I'm not interested in that kind of mastery. And so the water spray and this kind of intuitive way of working, it also means that obviously I've been working this for a while and can kind of not really predict, but sort of assume that the chemical reaction will work in such a way as to keep the form a little bit open. Or if I think that this line here, because there's going to be a line, I can know that, is going to be too strong, I can either add more water here or with my finger do the speckles.
The water seems to me as though you're waking something up, because I've been watching what's been happening, the minutiae, right? Like, and so, but it's a privilege to be able to do that because I'm not participating in the making of the work. But while you're doing that and sort of seeing how things are slowly kind of coming together and integrating with one another, and then seeing you, so the water kind of seems like a claiming back activity.
It does.
But it also just seems like to be able to do that, or to earn the right to be able to do that after all the time has passed, you have to think very critically about why and where. Yeah. And for what reason you're going to just bring something alive again after time has passed.
In a way, but if things come alive again, they also find new forms. So they're like this now would be very different to the way it was, because now it's been under the pressure of my finger here, and it won't stay like that because the canvas will bounce back. It's resistance. But there will be a residue here that there wasn't before. So it's, all these little islets and things happen all over the place. Now it's going back again. So yes, the water.
Could we make a request? If you have a burning question or a comment, hang on to it, keep on to it. We love them, and that's why we want to capture them. So if we could hold them for the Q&A, then we can actually give you a mic, and then we've got them on the recording, because now they'll be lost to us. We love them. Hang on to them. Thank you.
So now we've seen the water here. So let me start one of these paintings. Where's the little paper? Here. So imagine this is lockdown. I'm in my place. I can't mess up too much, although I messed a lot. I have my glue and ink, and use this one as fuller. You can see I go through a lot of this. And I just, that's also fine.
They never wanted to sponsor you. They never wanted to sponsor you.
They should have done, but I tell you that I went to one hardware store and they told me that there's this person who makes paintings with glue. I said, it's me, and they didn't believe me. Yes, so what I do with similar situation, but now the management, there's not so much wear and tear on my body. Here I just swirl the paper around. And paper, again, it's the field, it's the ground. The figure and the ground are in relation. And what I'm very aware of is the texture of the tooth of the canvas is crucial, can't be too smooth. The tooth of the paper is important. So it's like the tooth of the surface receives the medium. Again, there's a relationship in that way. And some paper just doesn't work, And here you can see, like the painting was mixing its own colors. These smaller works are doing the same thing. So,
Penny, could I ask if you just in there so we can see it on the overhead camera as well? Thank you.
So here, there's a lot of swirling around, and this kind of movement establishes really interesting, what would be random shapes, but for me, random is...
Just getting a bit closer to the other canvas, just so we can see it. Yes.
Oh, here.
Now we see. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll drop some on here as well, which will be fine. Which means when I drip them like that, and I don't want the drip to be obvious, what do? I go to the water. And that makes it join the other bits of the painting like it's part of the family. Okay. So you can see here, it's the same sort of principle. I will wait for this glue to dry. Let it see what it does in its own color mixing. But I also might do something like this. I didn't have a big canvas lying around at the time, but since I've been working on these Atlas paintings, I could do something like that. Okay. And then let that see what it does. So I would hold it upright for a while. It's easier to do on these smaller ones. And then I could make it go that way. You can see the movement. Okay. So now I might also let it dry against something, lean it against something. So it's easy with the paper. It will travel in a different direction. I wanted to mention something about it in response to your question about what do I do when there's an ugly part of the painting. And it has to have been dried, but I can still demonstrate. Yes. I can demonstrate here. I usually then take a scourer. This is my feminist maintenance piece. I carry on and I try and scrub it away. And sometimes you have to pull it away, it's almost like another skin. But I don't want to intervene too much in that way. But then what I probably need to do is throw parts of it again. And it becomes sometimes too much of an intervention, but that also then something I have to deal with. Yeah.
Something happens, yeah.
Yeah, something else happens. Something's always happening.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I want to just talk about the Atlas paintings, the ones that I started in lockdown. You can see all of this is the glue and ink. You can see here what I like to call the tails. So in the very big paintings, there are lots of tails, but they become very difficult because they're much thinner and they become what they are, which is like settled PVA, which is plastic, kind of plastic. And they become quite brittle, as you can see here. You can touch it. And the smaller ones, they work perfectly because they work even conceptually. Because they obviously mark the relationship, the sort of, not only internal to the works visually, but physically there's some kind of connection. And it's not always, it's not everywhere. So these paintings, there must be, I don't know how many, about 300 almost now, little paintings. Each one of them is a painting in its own. It's not just texture in a larger visual field. It's a finished little painting in its own little world. So here's a world, here's a world, here's a world, here's a world. They're all little worlds, and they have a relationship. They're never on their own. They're never sold on their own, they're never seen on their own. They're always in relation. And none of these, of course, are finished yet. And I brought them really to show you, and to show you one of the processes that we've not really been able to see here, which is this graffita process. So now this is actually thick impasto paint, but it's like that, but it's dried. So what I find that once I've worked too much or something with the oil paint on the surface, it's not even that it's too much, it's just that I want a different kind of receptive surface. Because you have this is glue and ink, manifestly so. And then this is oil paint because it has a different sort of oily, opaque surface. And this is oil paint that covered this whole area, which I scratched away and came back again to the glue and ink. So to the kind of given, to the found almost, because the glue and ink surfaces are now but like found objects, because I made them but I didn't make them, so now I'm working as if I'm working with a found element. And here, this was all there already, but there's the little bit of an eye, so all of a sudden you start seeing potentially a little figure there. So all the little figures, or the little creatures that I like to call them, the creatureles that come out through the process that I see and try and draw out in the paintings, often seem to be not quite human, and also perhaps there's a dissolution of the figure in a way that makes it so much manifestly part of the same membrane as what's around it. And I'm also aware of the time, so I don't want to get too involved in here, but I was very interested at that time, not only in the questions around climate change and the sort of decentering of the human, but also Abu Warburg, art historian in 1924 or something, went against the grain a bit and started looking at art history in images that were unrelated to one another. And he made these extraordinary big pinboards of images from art history or from ancient times juxtaposed and cut across time, chronological time, and various forms of thinking about the image. But what that really meant was, if you have so many images and so many gestalts of images, you start wondering what the primary image is. And I don't want to reflect on it too much now because you'll see it play out in the films. And I was fascinated by his atlas, and that's why it's called the title. And his atlas was Memosini Atlas. It's about memory and the impossibility of memory, and that you can't really get the primary image that a memory might take. It can never be. It's fugitive, it's furtive, and it's always in the imagination. And he also was obviously working at a time of huge sort of social and cultural and historical trauma. And somehow that came into the images that he selected, although he said they were random. They were not really random, or random is not random. What is random? You know, so that influenced me a bit, and his thinking influenced me quite a lot, or reflections on his thinking, perhaps not his thinking himself, but the reflections around the frailty of the human form in these contexts. So here you can see this little image emerge. I immediately think it's got something alive about it, creaturely, human, whatever, and that's what I asserted, only those two little parts. And for the rest of it is as it was. Here I scratched away until I've kind of discovered a little figure here. And this looks like a little cut animal. And this, I'm not sure what this is, but there's enough oil paint for me to scratch away to get these unforeseen kind of, forms that emerge from as a consequence of the pressure of my hand and the palette knife. There's no other reason for them to be there than as a trace of some pressure, in this instance a human hand with a tool. But I don't know if anybody else sees a little creature. I know. Here, what does anybody see here?
The lovers.
Lovers with
lovers,
something, little baby or something.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but I don't feel that this is sympathetic to that.
No.
So I kind of scratch it away. And obviously there's lots of layers of color and oil paint underneath. But something like the speckles that happen with the hand, here you get traces that come through. So it becomes more vulnerable and more exposed and less bounded. I could also bring out this little, if anybody knows about the Roland Barthes idea of the punctum, some little moment of extreme emotion or detail in a photograph. But we can do the same principle in a little painting. So what I'm just doing here is, it's not as mechanistic as this, I'm just doing it here, but there would be something like a little face. And this is very thick paper, so I can go right down to the paper. And little feet. I'm very into little hands and feet because they sort of speak of the edges of our bodies and what we do. And we often disregard our feet, and we shouldn't. Because they're great little opportunities for emotion. So another thing you'll see here is speckles. And this is a sense of maybe a landscape just by putting those lines in there. But this, we don't know what this is yet. I could try and accentuate its being by putting it as if it's in a kind of in water or in some mud or quicksand or whatever.
Penny, I'm going to be the reminder of the time again, I'm afraid.
I'm done now. So we could then just look at these. This was last year, I think it was, at Stevenson, up the road. I had a show in which the whole room, Loretta, was of these atlases. And you can see here they were spaced in this way, quite a lot of space between them. And then the next slide, we can see how they are now in Athens. This doesn't look that big because you don't have a figure. We should have had a figure in front of it, but it's a massive wall of atlases. So it's this principle that that each one of those, it's like a crowd, and each is an individual within this larger space. And it's quite difficult to see all of them because you have to look up, you have to look down, you have to look to the side. But in this process, there is movement, at least from the spectator's perspective. So we often don't think about painting as to do with time, but there is time in painting. First of all, this thing needs time. If you don't let it lie there for long, it won't be anything. So it needs obvious time. But there's time in looking, and there's time in making the work as well. And this just leads me to the films now, because obviously if I'm putting one work next to another, even as a grid, there's the sense that it's so long and there's so many, and as a viewer you're looking into each little world. So this is your body looking and walking and looking and walking. These are the shame paintings, so this was done much earlier, 2002 to 5, I think, but the same principle pertains. And this is really about the temporality of painting as well as the spatiality, but the sense that there's movement in the work, but movement in the way the work is perceived and apprehended, because your body looks, not just you. And that, of course, is what I started doing with my films. They are also, here. Now I'll just describe them briefly so that there's a connection. Here's details of the shame. We just go back. You can see, similar idea. All of them are individual works, almost like frames from a film, but they're framed in little white frames. And then, unlike the atlases, which are always just pinned with drawing pins, and that's what Abi Warburg did. He pinned and constantly changed them, so there was an idea that it was already montage of the works. And then there's a detail, which is the next slide, okay, which is quite important, just the way it will lead me into talking about the films, because there's text here. It's found text. They're all stamps that I buy from craft shops, which are sentimental things, like the Happy Mother's Day for your mum. It's not so happy when you see that there's a little bit of a potential wound in this image. But that little figure is made of glue. So it just gives you some idea of when I was talking earlier on about working with glue on a small scale. But the stamps are a given phrase, a ready-made emotion, if you like, that you can buy in craft shops. And my films, all of them have text. In a way, the text is ready-made, it's given. I treat it like it's a ready-made. And the films themselves, the frames that I use, they're all found. I don't use celluloid. I have the celluloid transferred onto digital. And the first time I see what's on what I found is when it's transferred to digital. So, I mean, I might try and do this, but I can't really see it. And anyway, I don't really want to see it. It's a little bit like the whiteness having to change to reveal what's underneath and the movement that's underneath. The same happens here. Buy them sight unseen, get them processed, get them digitized, and then look at what I have. And they're random. I don't know these people who shot these films. It's a surprise. I can't completely trust the text. Of course, I could trust my mum's ones, because I started with my mother, and it says here, Mrs. A. Siopis, Modern Bakery, Freiburg. She sent them to Johannesburg to get processed, and then come back to the little dorp. But it's a very interesting way to think about the glue as a kind of film surface, which could correspond to the celluloid, which is a plastic as well. And all the little images in Atlas or Shame becoming like all the little images that are endlessly being unspooled in these films. I'm aware that we're running out of time, so...
So could I invite the people who are closest to the wall at this point to perhaps move away for the next segment, because it's movie time.
Yeah.
And your necks are going to get a little bit stiff.
And I'm going to just carry on talking.
Yes.
So what you're going to see now first is just a tiny clip of a larger work, film called Obscure White Messenger. And Obscure White Messenger came as probably the main film after I had worked using my mother's home movies, which I had a different relationship to because I sort of semi-knew them, didn't know them entirely. And that film was made in 1997, and that was called My Lovely Day. And when I started my mother's movie and making My Lovely Day made me start thinking about other people's home movies. And that's when I searched charity shops and flea markets, and wherever I go in the world, that's what I do, look for these films. They're also interesting because they are a kind of memory, they are indexical, and they bring in many people into the single story that I then use these random clips to make. So with Obscure White Messenger, again, strangers movies, a lot of them, because I've now got a huge archive of reels, of footage, and I then make a new story from these random clips. And the story that is, if you like, behind Obscure White Messenger is the story of Demetrius Tsefendis and his assassination of H.F. Verwoerd in 1966. And why I'm mentioning this right now, because this is the part of the film you will see. One of the reasons given by the apartheid state, one of the I don't know what you'd call it, not a reason, but one of the, something that the media really reproduced was that this person was mad. There's no way that, particularly that this was, Demetrius Tsefendis was a person of mixed race, so there's no way that the apartheid state would publicize that a black agitator could actually get close enough to kill the architect of apartheid, because that would have been a huge indictment on the state itself. So the apartheid state. So the idea was perpetuated the whole time that this was a lunatic, crazy Greek. He wasn't a person of mixed race. He was a Greek, and he was tormented by this tapeworm that made him do it. And so that was the way to explain that his act wasn't politically motivated. And this is the part where you'll see what the tapeworm is, actually, as we go along. But this is the short clip. The montage element on all my films relating to Atlas and all the smaller paintings that work sequentially is that there are montages, that the spaces between, that the materiality of the film, if there's burn or if there's sprocket marks or dust on the surface of the celluloid, all these are actors in the process, just like all these speckles are actors. And so it's not just the image. It's important that it's not, or shall I say, all those actors are the image. The figure and ground is in some kind of conversation all the time. So the third element of the montage, the text, the image and sound. Okay, we're going to look at another one. If we have time, do you think we do Athena? Yeah, okay. You can see the blurriness. Actually, it's really beautiful to have that up, to see the relationship to the paintings. The blur is quite an important aspect for me to as a kind of open form as well, because I find it fascinating that when I was a child, I used to look at this image, not this one particularly, but these kind of scenic images, and think that that was a picture of reality. Like, there's no question. Now I look at a high-res image and think this is so manifestly a dream. But it wasn't a dream when I was 5 looking at it. It looked like, especially the images of me, it looked like me. And I discovered that it's really about the mobility of representation, the instability of representation. And the relationship of fiction to reality became something I really was curious in exploring through this instability of the figure ground, through the idea that representation is, we think is fixed, but it's actually not fixed, but what's the word? It sort of, it disturbs us always because we are bound to this idea of how we are represented, because mediation happens all the time. And I'm just sort of anticipating the next film where we often think of representation from a human perspective as well. We see it always from this human perspective, that even though we try and decenter the human, we are still constantly reimagining even the decenteredness, even the non-human, from a human perspective. So how can one make that feel different? Do you eliminate the figure of the human? It looks like I have done in that painting for dear life. There's no pictorial reference to human. Or is it always a pressure and a tension between materiality and representation? Is it always something that's part of what we do is not only in art but in life, that tension between the body, the materiality of the body, and the representation. But then this film that we're going to see now was also made during COVID. It's called Celluloid Body, and it brings you, basically, I won't tell you what it does, but let's just look. There's very little text, it shifts. So what you're seeing here, sorry, I'm talking over the music, but is actually light of the projector, in the shape of following the hole in the film. So basically there's a hole in the celluloid, and I'm just giving you a background now while it goes, because it's quite repetitive. When I was in Mexico City doing my usual looking for film at flea market, there's a huge flea market in Mexico City. I found this reel of 16 millimeter, and there was a hole. I don't know how the hole got there, but there was a hole in the outside of the film that I realized would have gone through the whole reel, because I could sort of put something in there and it went quite far in. And if I unspooled the reel, the hole would come at certain intervals. So put through the cine process that I use to transfer to digital, there is light, of course, and the light, which would be an absence in the film, becomes a presence in the film, in the projected film. So what it's done, the absence has invaded the celluloid, and it's become a character. And it's like chasing after the image. it's rushing about, and then it's a bit of a burn, because maybe the hole came as a consequence of a burn in the film. And it was fantastic for me, because this was a given. You know, this was what my thinking was, and here, a found random wheel did it all. And this wonderful scene where this woman is diving in the water, this creature is following her, and you know, it comes after her, and it's like little bits, it's taunting her and playing with her, and it's playing with itself. It's got arms and keeps moving. And it's fantastic that this is pure light. So light is the medium here. As light becomes the character, the form. So yeah, this poor fellow is trying to keep afloat on the rope. He wants to like rule the world, yeah. And then he's caught between frames. And the creature has become there. So you can see. And he's caught again frames. And the music's going crazy. Maybe we can hear it a little bit now. Like he's on a host. Okay.
So, time is not on our side. We do have time for maybe one, maximum two questions. So, if someone has a burning question, please throw up your hand and please wait for us to get a microphone to you before you ask your question. I saw one hand and I saw two. So, do we have the mic from the...
Thank you. Am I audible? Okay, yeah. I want to say, like, that's beautiful work. It's amazing.
Thank you.
I often find that with abstract work, or work that is very instinctual to make, you mentioned Jackson Pollock, so I'm assuming it falls under the category of abstract expressionism. maybe not the specific work, but the elements, the principles, you can pinpoint like the spontaneity in the work. My question is, there's often, it's a fine line between the work being like nice and translucent and it getting too muddy when you like start pouring painting and you start to move it around. I wanted to ask, how do you move along that line of not, is it a matter of knowing when to stop, or it's just a skill issue on my side?
I think it's all sorts of things. I think it's sometimes when you go so-called too far, that's also a powerful moment, because it doesn't mean that you can get back to your spontaneous part that you started with, that you might think you have lost, but you can get to another state which you can be surprised at. But that's if you're committed to it. I think if you give up, you think, oh, now it's an ugly painting, I can't do anything. If you decide, no, it's asking me now to enter that space of ugliness, you know, that's a value judgment, but enter that space that I think is a space of ugliness, that I've gone too far. And then something emerges from that too, that speaks differently. And spontaneous is not always necessarily, doesn't always necessarily deliver what I might be after. And I don't always know what I'm after, but I might not be after the beauty of that spontaneity always. I might be wanting to do something else. So the Atlas paintings, that's why I said they were difficult, demanding little paintings, because just as I'd got to think that there was something beautiful about this, and I then go and paint over it, and I think, no, that's no longer beautiful. Or when I walk past it, so these paintings were made in the space, when I walk past it and as I get out of bed and go to the kitchen to make a cup of coffee, I suddenly think, that's not actually the main little figure there, this is. So I'd get confused between figure and ground in a way. That confusion is good, because that's actually what they're doing. The kind of ambiguity, the open form that I was talking about, comes as a consequence of visual ambiguity. So is it this or is that? No, this and that is joined at the hip. They're kind of on the same frame, basically. So it's really a matter of, that's why I think painting is a very demanding practice, because it never stays still, because it's always the consequence, or the painting is not only making the painting, painting is constantly being made and as it's being looked at by me and everybody else. So it's a difficult question, and that's where I think it becomes around your, again, this is not a very precise answer, but one's particular disposition to materiality. That's, yeah.
Thank you. Next question.
What I wanted to know is, you said that none of the works were finished, and you also spoke about like continuously working on them. So what I was really curious about is, when do you know to stop? Like, what makes you decide that this is it?
I've answered this question before and got in big trouble to say this, but it's a deadline. Which really makes me very decisive.
And that's a good place for us to, and that's a good segue into us rounding up, because I know people have to get home.
I'm happy to carry on asking if you want to ask questions. I do want to also say that, is Sarah still here? Sarah
Yes,
Knuckle.
over there.
Sarah has written a beautiful piece on celluloid body in the book that she edited, which you might have seen around here. It's on my films, and it's just come out, published by Duke University Press, and the title is Your History with Me. And that is one of the texts from a film that I made called, we do one showing here, called She Breathes Water. And that film, She Breathes Water, starts with a great line, I think. It started with a splash. Your history with me. And then in a flash, catastrophe.